All right, welcome back to the Pear Genius podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kati, today, and we're here to explore the minds and methods of extraordinary people living in their genius zones. And today we have Dr. Lorraine Wright. And I wanted to make sure that you guys grab your front row seat for this one because we're going to have some amazing discussions about suffering, end-of-life care. Not that those are fun topics, but Lorraine has dedicated a good portion of her life to the topic of suffering, and it is fascinating. And we also did her website, lorrainewright.com, and I'll put the link in there and spell it correctly for you guys and everything. So definitely check it out, check her out. And without any further ado, welcome, Dr. Lorraine Wright. It's so awesome to get to spend some time with you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate this lovely opportunity. Very kind of you folks to invite me on your podcast. And the reason I did is because you did such a beautiful job on my website for me, especially you, Caddy. It was beautiful. I've got lots of wonderful feedback from friends and colleagues and family who have looked at it. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for today. Look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so if you can just fill everybody in on the last, like 50 years of your life, just quickly.
Oh, sure. Just the last 50 years of time. Then they'll only think I'm 50. Good.
Yeah, exactly. No, but you have some amazing books. Like, I want to hear a little bit about that. I want to hear about some of the work that you've done in a couple of your chapters, and then we're just going to dig right into what you're all about now.
Well, how about the Reader's Digest version? I'm dating myself right away talking about the Reader's Digest, right?
Perfect.
Many people won't even know what that is. Anyway, so once I did all my graduate work in the United States, my master's and doctorate. And once I came back home to Calgary, I don't know if should I tell this funny little story? Maybe I won't tell.
Yes. Always tell a funny story. You never ask. You just do it.
It's kind of a funny, sad story. So I come back to Calgary in 1976 after doing my graduate studies in the States and Hawaii and Utah. And I had a PhD and I was just turning 30. And boy, I thought I was really, amazing because there wasn't that many nurses. My background is in nursing, and there wasn't that many nurses with PhDs. So I was thinking I was just going to get hired just so quickly and they would be so impressed. So off I went to the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary and had a meeting with the dean. And she said to me, what would I do with someone with a PhD in nursing specializing in family? She said, we don't have anything like that. So I went, oh dear. Well, so off I went to the Faculty of Medicine. And the sweet Faculty of Medicine hired me right away. So I spent the first few years of my career at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Medicine. They employed me in the Department of Psychiatry, but I taught undergraduate and graduate students in medicine about families and illness. And then I also participated in working in their family therapy program. So it was a wonderful few years that I spent in the Faculty of Medicine until I got a phone call one day. And this lovely dean, Margaret Scott Wright was her name. Interestingly, she had a hyphenated Scott Wright, and she opened the door for me to come back to nursing and said, what is a PhD nurse doing over in medicine? I said, well, I couldn't get a job. So she said, no, you have to come over. And she said, I want to take you to lunch. So she took me to lunch and made me an offer I couldn't refuse and said, no, we're starting a master's program in nursing. We want to have a strong family focus. And that was my great interest. And so we'd really like to offer you this. And so one of the first things I said, well, I would really like to have a clinic where I could see families who are suffering with serious illness and work there with my students. And she said, yes, we can do that. So, wow, that was amazing. So that's how I went back to my original discipline of nursing and still had a joint appointment with medicine for a few years, and then eventually just stayed immersed in the nursing faculty. So I was there for 30 years at the University of Calgary, and we had this wonderful outpatient clinic that we call the Family Nursing Unit. And that really became the touchstone for all my research, all the clinical ideas I developed over the years, and wonderful experience of working with masters and doctoral students there. And after several years there, I was sort of ready to be set free. And I thought, I don't really feel like marking papers anymore. And I started to get lovely invitations more and more to come and lecture or do something in different parts of the world. So I thought, well, that's kind of a nice idea. I would like to do that after 30 years. So I left the university and thought, well, this will be a nice thing to do for 5 years, maybe just lecture different places. I always, was involved clinically. I had a clinical practice, of course, seeing families in the family nursing unit where students would observe me do it, with families. And then I would, of course, observe them and give them feedback. And I had a private practice too. So I thought, well, that'll be nice. I'll do some private practice and maybe the odd bit of lecturing. And for 5 years or more, well, it's been 20 years of doing that. So for the last 20 years, whenever I get these lovely invitations to come and lecture or do workshops or present at a conference in different parts of the world, I do that. And when I'm home, I do some counseling and enjoy this very privileged life that I've had. So that in a nutshell, that's the Reader's Digest version of the last 50 years.
That's amazing. It's wow. Where do we even begin to unpack? And one of my first questions while you were talking is like, wow, I really hope that you inspired other cities in Canada and hopefully in the US to do the same thing, since you were such a trailblazer.
Yes, well, our graduate students have been the ones to carry the torch forward. I wish I could say that family nursing across Canada is an integral part of the practice in hospitals. Unfortunately, it's not. It's been my life's work, but it hasn't been, it's integrated in different pockets. But if you were to look at the philosophy of care in most hospitals, I'd say in probably 90% of the hospitals in Canada or clinics, they would say that part of their philosophy is involving families in the practice, but it's not always materialized. But there is a shift. Families are now requesting and demanding to be involved in practice and to be seen. So and it's always been interesting to me whenever I've gotten an invitation to come and do a workshop in a hospital, when I ask them, well, why now? Like, why are you inviting me to come and do this workshop? And what do they say? Well, we're getting a lot of complaints from families that they're not being talked to enough. So yes, it's in pockets. We have graduates that have gone out from the University of Calgary. They've done wonderful things. They've gone and taught in other universities, like colleagues in Montreal. My good friend and colleague, Dr. Fabi Duhamel, she's implemented a similar practice in French at the University of Montreal and a similar clinical practice. So it's happened across the country, but it's like I said, it's not universal. It's in small pockets here and there. And when I've gone to different countries, it's more, maybe not integrated is the right word, but it's more expected in Asian countries and in countries where there is a very strong family focus or family culture. Not to say that we don't care about families in Canada or the US, but it just hasn't been embraced the same. But families are the ones now that are saying, we want to be seen as a family. We want to discuss these things. We want to talk about how we are coping or managing the illness or the disability or the loss in our family. Yeah.
I read a couple of your books, but one of the books I read, I realized that the person with the illness is not necessarily the one who is suffering the most, but that it's the people who care for that person. So the family and the extended family. And for them not to be seen is such a disservice because that person who has the illness and is suffering also feels the suffering of the people that they're being supported by. So they don't know how to support them. So what a beautiful thing to start to bring in the family and shift the focus a little bit. So it's crazy that during COVID, families were taken out of the hospitals. People were dying alone, family members couldn't say goodbye. Has there been a shift back? Are they bringing the families back in more now?
Well, you said a lot of good things there. Thank you for, I haven't done any research on what I commonly say when I do some lectures or workshops is that, like I say, first of all, that illness is a family affair. When one person is ill in a family, it affects all family members. And when you were saying about, about the suffering, this is something I discovered just from clinical practice, not about reading it in a book, or I haven't done any research on it, but when I would ask this question, who in the family is suffering the most? It would be at least 80% of the time, it would not be the person with the illness diagnosis. It was another family member. So therefore, that makes a very compelling argument of why families need to be seen and why families are requesting to be seen. Okay. So I forgot I just wanted to comment on that. What was the last piece of your question, Kathy?
There was more of a shift on bringing families back in, especially because of COVID.
Well, that was COVID was such an interesting time of what we did and what we expected of families. And yes, we did separate families. And we recognized that part of the healing in families, not the curing we're talking about, but part of families' healing is to have regular contact with their families. But why did we do that? Why did we not allow families to come? Because it was based on, this is what so much of my work over the years has been based on, is looking at illness beliefs. And there was illness beliefs of the healthcare professionals that what? The strong belief was, if we separate families, if we keep their loved one more isolated, we will save lives. It was based on a belief that having more contact with your loved one, you might also contact, especially in the elderly, that we know that COVID affected the elderly terribly. And so it was based on a particular belief.
It's dark days, dark days. I always used to say, and not a joke, that quarantine is for sick people, not for healthy people. And they were quarantining everyone. It was, the medical system was inverted. It was turned on its head, in my opinion.
Well, there was two really interesting things that happened, I think, out of COVID in terms of my particular practice. One was, yes, families begged and wanted to be with their loved one, and their loved one wanted to be with their families. And we realized that illness is a family affair, as I've repeated, and families wanted to be with their loved ones. And we know that is an incredible, important part of the healing, is having contact with your family member. The other really interesting thing to me, and I wrote a little blog about this a while ago, was before COVID, there was a tendency in North America to do away with mourning rituals. More and more people were not having funerals or a celebration of life or an obituary. It was really interesting to me during COVID that families wanted to have these mourning rituals again. They were asking to have a funeral, even if it had to be, online. They wanted to be able to reconnect, because we know from the grieving literature that grieving rituals are really significant to manage a loss. And when we do away with those grieving rituals, when we don't have them or don't allow them, people feel lost. And so it's so interesting to me that during COVID and since COVID, there seems to be a resurgence in funerals, in celebrations of life, and people having, not saying they don't want an obituary. Now, there's still some people, of course, and we have to respect that prefer not to have any funeral or celebration of life, or
it's really interesting to see the gift that it is once it's taken away. And once we get it back, we don't take it for granted like we might have. And seeing the importance of, oh wow, my soul really needs this closure. It's good to be together with your family, to have that closure as a family. I didn't realize that was such a huge thing that was missing until it was.
Yeah. No, it's been, those are two, I think, really significant outcomes that from COVID. We all learned so much, and it was a very difficult time for many people, and especially those who were ill, and not able to, and especially for the elderly. But like I said, based on, beliefs that stay home and save lives. That was the belief that we had around that, why we didn't let family members visit.
I like the idea of illness beliefs. Now, that was another thing that really stuck out to me when I was working within your brand, was illness beliefs play such a crucial role in your healing process. And not just your own, but everybody else around you. And then, I mean, for me during the pandemic, my illness belief was I'm indestructible. I love my immune system. I'm going to go and hug and lick doorknobs, and I would be 100% okay. And you know what? I was really good. I was
Wow.
totally fine. So let's talk about illness beliefs and how big of a role they actually play in the healing process.
Well, you've hit on the golden nugget to me. You know, we did some research in our family nursing unit several years ago, and the most amazing, and it dictated how we practiced after, and it evolved our particular illness beliefs model that Dr. Janice Bell and I developed, and Dr. Wendy Watson also. So we did this bit of research, and it was an amazing finding. It wasn't the finding that even that we were trying to research, but it showed us that what people believe about their illness, okay, what they believe is the etiology, like what caused their illness, what do they believe about the best healing and treatment, what do they believe about the prognosis, what do they believe about the role of family members, what do they believe about the role of healthcare professionals and spirituality and religion. That had more to do, their illness beliefs had more to do with how they coped or managed their illness than anything else. What people believe about your illness, and I always like when I'm doing when I'm doing workshops, just to talk about the common cold. It's a great thing to say, you know, who has a cold today? And there's always somebody that has a cold. And then to ask, what do you believe is the best way to heal and treat your cold? And why did you get a cold in the first place? You will have as many answers about why somebody has a common cold. Okay? What are some of them? Stress. I was cold. Some people believe you wash your hair and go out with wet hair on a cold day, you'll get a cold. There's so many beliefs about how you get the common cold, and there's just as many beliefs about how we should treat it. You know, some people say, I go to bed and I just take to the bed and drink vitamin C or eat vitamin C and have, honey in my tea and I'll get better. And other people say, no, I just keep going and go to work. I don't believe in taking to the bed. And other people, if you ask them, well, what are your beliefs about the role of family members when you have a cold? I want to be left alone. And other people say, no, I want all the attention I can get. It helps. And you can take that from the common cold all the way to cancer. And you will have just as many ideas about why do people get cancer? Why do they get multiple sclerosis? What is the best way to heal and treat your cancer? What is the best way to heal and treat your multiple sclerosis? You get the same, potpourri of illness beliefs. And so in our clinical work and in my practice, it's so important that I understand what are the beliefs of the person with the illness diagnosis, and then what are the beliefs of family members, and then what are the beliefs of the healthcare professionals? Because if you have disagreements around that, okay, if you have disagreements around, especially between the healthcare professional and the family, you're going to have conflict. Or if you have differences between the person with the illness and some family members about the best way to heal or treat. Some family members will say, I don't want chemotherapy for my cancer. And other family members will say, no, you have to have it. We want you to have it. And then what does the healthcare professionals say? Do they say it'll be useful or not useful, or it might help, or it might not make any difference? So illness beliefs are absolutely, Katie, it's the gold nugget of how people respond and manage and deal with their illness. All about beliefs.
You know what's so wild is that I feel like that would be a superpower for all healthcare professionals if they understood the belief of the person they're trying to treat. Because if your belief is leading your healing, and that physician or nurse or whoever can get in alignment with that, or if there can be like, so we're down here and up here, and if we could just kind of bring it to the middle ground. So I think that's where the term softening suffering, the word softening comes in so beautifully, because from both sides, from everybody who's involved in this circle around the person who has the illness, if everybody can soften, how much more do we allow the flow of healing to happen? Because you can't heal in conflict. It's impossible. The
No,
energy of it is too severe.
no. You would make a great nurse, Caddy.
Oh no, sick
That
people
is,
freak me out.
no, but that's exactly what I'm hoping, when I teach young nurses or practicing nurses, that they will come to, that their beliefs have a tremendous impact on the people that they're caring for. And so how do we deal then? If our beliefs are different, if our illness beliefs are different from the person that we're caring for, how do we get aligned? Well, first of all, we have to be curious, right? What are the beliefs of the patient that you're caring for in the bed, or that you're seeing in the clinic, or the outpatient clinic, or in their home? What does the patient believe about his prognosis? What does the patient believe about the best way to heal and treat, or the role of his family? And
I
what
would,
does and what do the family members believe? And if
right.
your beliefs are different, okay, from the family, you have to find a way to engage with them, a way to that your beliefs aren't the true beliefs, okay? That your beliefs aren't what I call the sin of certainty.
Mm.
And it starts always with being curious. And sometimes our beliefs are very different than the family. But how do we find a way to come together so that we can work together? Because if our beliefs are very different about the diagnosis or about the prognosis or the etiology, okay, it becomes very difficult to work with someone. So we
Uh,
have to find the common ground, and I find that the best way to do that is what I call curious compassion, love without judgment. Okay? That we're curious about what people believe, and then we try to find a way, okay, to work with them according to what our best professional beliefs are and what their beliefs are, so that we don't cause conflict, so that we don't have them in conflict with us, and we try to heal any conflicts that are between family members.
yeah, I was going to say that's amazing. And I was thinking about what my beliefs are while you were talking, and I thought, my beliefs are the most important beliefs to me. And right? I mean, really. So, okay, so what are my beliefs? My beliefs are my immune system's amazing. I love it. But I know that when I become extremely stressed out, that's usually when my immune system will drop its guard. And that's where I will start to not feel well. Not because I went outside with wet hair or I was naked, cold plunging in the water. It's usually because of a stress thing that I find that afterwards I don't feel well. So I guess I put the two to two together, and then now that's my belief. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know. But I also wanted to say that yes, my wife is an amazing caregiver, but I have exactly one day of being bedridden and then it's over. I have to get out of that bed no matter what and fix myself.
Yes. Well, you said a very important thing. Our beliefs do give us our identity. Okay. I mean, that's what we believe is our identity. However, we need to be able to shift those beliefs when they're no longer useful, or when they're getting us into difficulty or into trouble. Okay. We have to be able to open space to other people's ideas and other people's beliefs. So should I share a clinical story with you, just to
Yes,
an example? So this is one of my
definitely.
favorite paradigm stories. I've counseled probably hundreds of families, but I don't remember everybody's stories. But the ones that I do remember are the ones that where there was dramatic change, okay, where we really seemed to click and we really were able to help the family in softening their suffering or their healing, or where I made a mistake and needed to reflect on my practice and go back and say some things differently or offer some other ideas. So this is one family that really has stayed in my mind for years, because it was such a dramatic example of conflict between family members. And then I can share with you another example of when it's with healthcare professionals, if you like. But so we had a referral to the family nursing unit from the Children's Hospital. And it was a mother and father and a little boy, 6 years old, and the sister. The 6-year-old boy had a brain tumor. The family was told at the Children's Hospital, at least this was their story, what they heard, that their son only had a 50-50% chance of surviving, even if he had chemotherapy. And the family made a very difficult decision. They said that they wanted their child to live as normal a life as possible for as long as possible. So the hospital said, well, if that's the case, there is nothing more we can do for you. Now, that's different than my belief, because I believe that talking is healing. But the family then was no longer going to be seen. I didn't follow up with anybody at the Children's Hospital to say, is that exactly what you said to them? I just took them at face value that this is what they heard. And so when I was working with them, and I did an assessment and tried to understand, their beliefs about their son and why they had made this, very difficult decision. And at the end of our session together, the mother looked at me and said, do you think we're bad parents?
Oh,
what a question. So how do you answer something like that? Do you believe we're bad parents? And I said, no, I do not believe you're bad parents. I believe you're very courageous parents. And you did something that you believed was in the best interest of your child. And what did the parents do when I said that? They wept. They wept. Because why? Because they felt like they were being blamed, or that the health professionals didn't care for them, or that they thought they were making a cruel and wrong decision. So how do we know that those are the right decision or the wrong decision? It was just very interesting to us that, we did some work with this family, just 3 or 4 sessions. They found it very useful, gave them some ideas. One of the things that we worked on was the father, because he was a musician and played his guitar, he would go to his bedroom and not talk to his wife about his feelings. He got them out by playing his guitar, and we were able to unite them to talk more directly to each other about how this terrible potential loss in their family would be. And we finished working with them. A year later, in the newspaper in Calgary, there's an article about this family, that they had chosen to not do chemotherapy, but just to let their child live as normal a life as possible and try a particular diet. And he was still alive 1 year later. Now, I don't know if that child survived past that or not, but they had another year with their child, as from what we know of. How much more beyond that, I don't know. So there's an example where healthcare professionals, unfortunately, and I'm not blaming the healthcare professionals, they probably said that, there probably wasn't any more they could do for them physically if they weren't going to choose chemotherapy. You know what I'm saying? In terms of physical treatment, but in terms of emotional treatment or spiritual treatment, I mean, that's where we took over, because they weren't offered anything more there. So there's one example about, what you can do to try and resolve any hurt or conflict. But it also challenged my beliefs, because you want children to survive as long as possible. And I sat there wondering, well, if it's 50-50, why not go on the side of the 50 that might cure him or that might make a difference? So I had to, come to that on my own to say, no, this was the parents' very difficult decision. And when parents make a very difficult decision like that takes tremendous courage. And then they open space to me to other ideas that it's amazing. If you join with the family around some of their beliefs, even if it maybe not be totally what you would have thought or recommended, but just to be curious, to have curious compassion, love without judgment, then I was able to work with that family. And they were more open to my ideas, that I didn't scold them or say there was nothing more that we could do. But you have to have a belief that talking is healing. And it doesn't mean talking is healing the illness. It means that talking is healing, that they will find some peace around the illness, and be able to live with it. Yes.
That's another major shift. I think that once people realize that when we're talking about healing, it's not necessarily for the sake of curing the illness, although sometimes that does happen anyway. But I think if you lead with healing in terms of feeling at peace with your decisions, feeling at peace in your relationships, feeling at peace with yourself, this is actually what healing references when we say healing. It's the whole experience, it's the people around you. So the fact that you were able to see the family and they wept, and I feel like that was probably the defining moment that allowed them the softening so that they were then able to best care for the child because they're the primary caregivers in that situation, especially because they remove themselves from the medical system because they didn't choose the chemo. So that's so beautiful. And it's so amazing that, and I wish there was a billion of you so that everybody had access to that. Because a lot of us are turning away from institutional medicine and looking for different options because I feel like there's a little bit more softening and flow with alternative medicines.
Yeah. Well, I loved your analysis. That was a lovely critique of my clinical work. I have another story I have favorite stories. Can I tell you a favorite story of a cancer center I visited in Thailand?
For sure. That's what we do on
Yes.
podcasts. We tell fun stories.
Okay, because this ties into what you were just saying, Katie, about healing versus curing. So I've been to Thailand many times. I love the country. My colleagues there have become dear friends. And so I usually present there almost every year at a conference or two. And so a few years back, I was visiting Thailand with one of my colleagues, with Dr. Fabi Duhamel, and we were offered by our Thai colleagues, we had been lecturing up in Khon Kaen University, and we were offered this opportunity. They said, would you like to visit a center in the middle of nowhere where a monk accepts families, the whole family has to come when a family member is at the end of life with cancer? And we said, yes, that would be an amazing opportunity. So off we went in this van, and they took us to this cancer center. And it was really amazing. He only would take families, the whole family had to come. And he had various rituals that he would do during the day. He would have some lectures on Buddhism in the morning. He would have a particular Thai, with different potions and teas that went into it, and the family would all help to stir it, and they would give it to their loved one. And while we were there on that very day, someone died while we were there, and they asked us if we'd like to come and see the family and be with the family. And it was really an amazing experience to see how we integrated rituals into this. And of course, families came there as really, it was the last hope that they had for their loved one. I mean, these were families who were family members, their loved one with an illness, who were very ill. And so at the end of the day, we had an opportunity to sit with this monk and just ask him questions about the center. And so we asked this question. So when families come here, do they believe, because it's so dire and they're in such despair and their last hope, that do they come and they have to live there in the center with their family member? Do they believe that, or do they want to be cured, or what do they believe is going to happen? He said, it's really fascinating. When they come here, they want a cure. And when they leave, they're content with healing. I said, you would make a great nurse, to this monk. So it was amazing. I mean, he knew that the ultimate goal was to have families come and find some peace and some acceptance around the fact that their family member was probably not going to survive. And most of the family members that came there not necessarily died there, but many of them went home and then did die. There wasn't that many because they came really at the end of their lives, desperate for one more something to be hopeful. Perhaps some of them did survive, but he said that most of the people that come there eventually, they would die sometimes at the center or afterward. But I thought that was such a beautiful thing that he made that distinction between curing and healing. And certainly, people expect medical doctors to cure people. They want to be cured of their illness, but there's not much curing that really happens. We do get over some things, but most of the time, most illnesses change us in some way. Okay? And we have to make some adjustments in our lives. And family members where there's a chronic illness or a long-standing illness or a disability, it changes your lives quite dramatically. So it's really a
Find
healing. I think that's the business that nurses and social workers and psychologists are in the business of healing, of trying to help people come to live, to be at peace with their illness and to find ways to either live alongside of it or, live with it and to be able to mourn the life that was. Yeah.
feel like our society has come to a point where we are very far removed from ceremony, from rites of passage, from rituals, and we live very individual lives. We don't live close to our families in a lot of cases. They live spread out all over the world. And I feel like when it gets to that last chapter and you are ready to make that final journey, how many people get to have all of their family spend all of that quality time with them? So when there is a place in Thailand that's a safe container for the family to come, at the end of someone's life, all they need is quality time. I think that's really the greatest gift you can give somebody who is making this transition, who has finished their journey, is really intentional quality time. And the fact that they're incorporating the ritual of the teas and the stirring, I mean, you're
Yes.
creating a space that's so loving and connected. Like there's this giant piece of connection. So,
Yeah.
I mean, my God, if we had that here, if we had access to that, it would be so beautiful. So now that we're kind of pivoting to, let's talk about end of life, because it's a difficult thing to navigate, especially I think in like first world countries like Canada and the US, where we are a little bit more separated. We don't have generations living in the same house. So you do end of life care. Now, I've heard of death doulas before, and I've never really been able to anchor into what that is. I mean, I feel like I would make a good death doula. I'm really tuned into people as they're transitioning, but for me, it would have to be from somebody experienced. It would have to be from somebody who has lived a long, full life and has witnessed many deaths and has helped be that guide and that ritual of transitioning. So, what is it you do exactly in the end of life care?
Well, I think it's brilliant that you picked up on the significance of rituals at the end of life. And I mean, the best that we try to replicate that in North America is in hospice and palliative care. If every nurse could be like palliative care nurses or hospice nurses, they are they are very special nurses, and they try to create rituals and have that quality time available to families, and whether it be in hospice or palliative care at home. But so my work in end of life is around counseling families that are at end of life, that they want to talk about what they're experiencing. Oftentimes they reach out to me because there's conflict in what they're experiencing, and they don't want this for their family member at the end of life. They want to come to some peaceful place with each other. And oftentimes the conflict is around about the manner of death, okay? Because there are more options now, as we know, in Canada. And but there are people that, in hospice and palliative care who are with the person right at the end of death. Now, I've been present at the death of parents and friends, but I'm not present in my counseling efforts with families at the end of life. I'm not present there if they've chosen MAID. My work is around end of life counseling about those decisions and trying to help them resolve if there's conflict around those decisions family members are making. And more recently, I've worked with many families with all types and kinds of illnesses, but it's really interesting to me that I'm getting more requests for end of life counseling now. And oftentimes it's around issues of MAID. So we know in Canada, there's end of life care, which simply means what it says, that a person is coming closer to the end of their life. Usually we're talking about a few months or sometimes just a few weeks. And so there's many decisions that need to be made now by family members that know that their life is ending. Now, when we have sudden deaths, those are very painful, difficult situations when a person hasn't had any time to discuss with the family about their goodbyes with each other, they're reminiscing with each other, all these things that we know that are so important. But if it is end of life, there are more options. I mean, there is what we call palliative care. Okay. And the main thing that we're always trying to do in end of life that most family members are most concerned about is managing pain. And it's always about suffering, like we've talked, like you were mentioning, Kathy. End of life is about how to manage suffering, from my perspective. That suffering can be from pain, from physical pain, it can be from emotional pain, it can be from spiritual pain, or it can be all three. And it's always amazing to me, as I've worked with many families where they know that one family member is getting closer to the end of their life, that again, it's usually the person with the illness diagnosis is not the one suffering the most emotionally or spiritually, but oftentimes they are suffering the most in terms of physical pain. So this is the nature of my work. I think it's very sacred work to be talking about end of life with family members. I feel it a great privilege that families will engage me to talk about those kinds of things. And my goal is to have them explore various ideas, various decisions, whether they be to choose palliative care, in terms of increasing pain medication, or whether it be to talk about the option of MAID, which is more in our consciousness now in our society in Canada, since it was first made legal in 2016. It's very abhorrent to some families. It's not supported by most religious faiths. And yet nurses and other people are called upon to engage in administering medication to bring someone's life to an end. So this kind of work that I do, this kind of counseling I do with family members is very important. And sometimes families still are in conflict, and the person that would like to have chosen MAID, the family is totally against it, and they postpone it don't do it at all. And other families have come together around it. So it's another challenging aspect for healthcare professionals. And there are nurses and doctors who do not want to be involved in any way in the actual being present during MAID. Okay? And there's other nurses and doctors who are asking to be part of this. They feel it's such an amazing, sacred time of a person's life. So, and there are many, issues around it. And I have the privilege right now of actually serving. I was invited to be on a working group of the Canadian Parish Nurses Ministry Association in Canada to review their guidelines for nurses being involved in MAID. And what are the guidelines for nurses, these parish nurses? Now, it's really paradoxical because most nurses that are parish nurses belong to a faith community.
Right.
And so they have this interesting challenge. Okay? And my own faith doesn't support MAID. I don't know of any, I can't think of any Christian faiths that really support MAID. And so, you have families in this dilemma.
No doubt. I mean, when you think about end of life and, organized religion, I know there's a place for it, but I feel like when you're there, you're at the end of life, you're in that much pain that you're open to all options, then that also opens up your spirituality to more option. It goes outside of the box of organized religion, and it becomes a very different thing. Now, MAID is not something that I think a lot of couples talk about. Like I was going to ask Alex, I don't know if you would ever choose MAID. Like you and I have not talked about that. And we've talked about everything. Like I'm sitting here, I'm like,
No.
wait a minute, would we choose that? I know, guarantee you I wouldn't, but would you?
You're going to ask me on the podcast right now?
Yep. I'm
Yeah,
asking you right now.
it's really wild. You know what? I don't know. I mean, I've put the cats down. I've made that decision. But that's not my wife. I don't know.
Oh
You would
no,
have to
not putting me down, putting you down.
put me
Let's
down.
get
Oh,
this clear.
I could put me down, no problem. It would be you. It's if I saw you, and I don't know, I would battle with myself watching you suffer. Even let's say you didn't have a voice and I had to be your voice. Wow, that would haunt me. That would haunt me. Like for me, I could care less about me. Whatever. If I'm suffering, whatever. Pull the plug. Done. It's watching the people that I love the absolute most in this world, and now the decision's put upon me to do that. Wow. I would call
So
Lorraine.
Lorraine,
Lorraine,
let's
what do I
ask you
do?
that then, right? Like, does the spouse have to make that decision?
No, when we're talking about, there's health directives, that we all are encouraged to have, especially when you're older like me. It's the responsible thing to do to have health directives. And the health directives are not about MAID. The health directives are simply if you were in a comatose state, for example, do you want to have all measures done? Do you want to have resuscitation? Do you want to be in ICU and continue? Or if you're in a vegetative state, would you be agreeable to not have your life sustained if there's no hope for you surviving? That is a very responsible thing for us to do. And most places now, when you're admitted to hospital, want to have your health directives. They want to know your wishes. Now, that is different than MAID. Okay.
Right.
MAID is, as we know, is medical assistance in dying. That is where you have asked, okay, and have been assessed and have actually set a date, okay, because of intolerable suffering. And usually it's for, there's two tracks of MAID. One is track one, and that is usually intolerable suffering from physical suffering of pain, usually by cancer patients. And then there's track two, which is much more challenging, where your quality of life and the meaning of your life is not what you had hoped or wished for at this stage of your life. So that's examples like ALS, okay, or multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, where your quality of life continues to decline and decline and decline. So there's always two people that make the assessment, and then it's a physician and a nurse, usually a nurse practitioner, that are there to administer the medication at the time and place that you set. Now that can happen in a hospital, it can happen in hospice, it can happen in your home. And then which family members want to be present at the end of life and which don't. But it's actually no different. That piece is no different than when you're dying more slowly, not on a particular date, that family members also, some family members do not want to be with their family member at the last moment. Some family members, that's very important. And I always ask that to clarify amongst, is it important that your loved one is with you when you die? And to ask the family, is that important? Is that something you want to? Do you want to be there when your family member is dying or not? Some people do not want to, please. They don't want to witness that. But I just had a very interesting experience in Thailand. I just was there presenting at a conference on spirituality and psychology. And I presented about end-of-life care and about MAID. I didn't go into MAID very extensively, but more about end-of-life care, and gave some clinical examples. And after it was over, a couple of the questions were asked of me. And I had a very interesting talk after with a couple of my Thai colleagues and with a Buddhist nun. And they said to me, we cannot imagine or conceive of the idea of setting a date of when you will die. And they wanted to clear. So you set a date and drugs are administered and you die. Now, in the Buddhist religion, it's all about managing suffering, that life is suffering, and how do you manage it and how do you live with it? So it was very interesting to me to say, yes, when you say it out loud like that, you set a date and then you're administered a drug and then you die. I mean, it helped me to realize why this is so impactful or so difficult for some family members to support their loved one, because they're the one that's going to witness it. They're setting a date. They will be there if they want to be there. Not all family members want. A drug is administered and then you die, and then your loved one will die. Now, in hospital, of course, in palliative care, I mean, I've witnessed this with friends and with my own parents, is what I call soft MAID. At the end of a person's life, in the last few days, you will be asked, and if you have health directives, you will be given more and more, palliative medication and sedatives in order that you don't suffer. So the death is drawn out a little bit longer, okay? But it's not at a particular moment in time. And so most people are comfortable or more comfortable with that approach than with MAID, but MAID is certainly becoming requested more. It's about 4% of our deaths in Canada now. But I have to thank my Buddhist friends and colleagues and the Buddhist nun. And yet the Buddhist nun asked me a very interesting question. She said, you know, I can't get my mother to do her health directives. I want health directives for my mother. And she won't hear any part of it. But she said, I've done them for myself about what I wish and don't wish at the end of life. Not about MAID, there's no such thing in Thailand. But she did want, she said, how can I approach my mother? And I said, maybe you could ask your mother to give you this gift. That it would be a gift if you knew her wishes at the end of her life, so that you don't have to struggle with that. So she said, okay, I'm going to go and meet with my mother and see if I can have her say what her health directives are, what she would.
I think that some of the problem is that it's called health directives, because right away I had a terrible emotional reaction to the word health directive. Like,
Yes.
I'm just like in the army and I'm just like, I don't know, it's weird. It's a little bit robotic for me. So I think if we could title it something else.
Kathy's going to rebrand health directives.
Health, well, maybe health wishes or health. Yeah. What do we wish?
I was going to say that if I wasn't with my mom when she went to Calgary for the hyperbaric oxygen chamber therapy, they asked her if she wanted to be resuscitated if something happened, and she didn't understand. She just like, no. And I looked at her, I'm like, what are you talking about, Mom? Like, you're not dying in an oxygen chamber. Like, they will do CPR. They'll bring you back to life. Like, you're not gonna, like, my mom did not understand. That terrified me. Like, if I was not there to advocate for her and something happened, they would have just let her die right there. That freaked me out. And then part two to my story is my mom is dying in Slow-Made in a Catholic hospital in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, and they don't do end of life stuff. So they basically, for 2 weeks, drug her beyond belief until she starves to death or whatever, or succumbs to the cancer. I don't think that I would be okay with my wife, like watching my wife do that for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 3 days, and knowing that it's just going to carry on that way. I would probably have a limit of like 2 or 3 days and be like, okay, this is it. There's no more, like, I'm done suffering. She's done suffering. I'm calling it right now. I'm putting it on the record here, dear. I'm pulling the plug on you after like 2 or 3 days.
And did your mother have her health wishes? Had she said what she wished for? You said in terms of
No.
you think she didn't.
She didn't. No, I mean, even if she had those health wishes that she didn't want to suffer or whatever, they still did. Like, they didn't offer those services. It was basically, we're going to morphine you up until you're just gone. And that took 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It is a long time. And that is one of the decisions or one of the options in palliative care, yes, is just to remove all, life-saving measures in terms of resuscitation or oxygen, and provide medication, and yes.
So who's the most progressive country in the world with respect to MAID? Would it be something like Switzerland or?
I don't know in terms of progressive how I would
like
answer.
they've been doing it longer than us.
Yes, certainly they have been doing it longer, and I don't know in terms of
who can we learn from so that we don't make mistakes?
But once it comes into the consciousness of a society, then it's talked about more. So that's why I'm interested about families reaching out to me for end of life discussions, because they hear about it now, that there's more options. And even if you don't support MAID or want anything to do with it, the fact that we're talking about death and dying and what a person's wishes are and how do we want to manage that and what will that look like in our family and where do we want it to happen? Do you want your family member in your home or at the hospice or in a hospital? I mean, sometimes we don't have a choice if they've already been admitted to a hospital setting and they're not well enough to be moved anywhere. So it's opening up, I think, a very significant discussion that we have not been good about in North America, not at all. And so family members' wishes, I think it's a good thing that we are opening up this discussion more and being more open about it, and the wishes, the wishes of what a person wishes at the end of their life, and what do they wish right after their life? What do they wish for their funeral or not? What do they wish? So my own father, when I would try to be, I thought, the loving daughter and ask him what he would like at his funeral and think about what hymns he might like. And he would say to me, Lorraine, it's not about me. This is for you. You can do whatever you want. And so some people, make very, my father was just completely open, do whatever you want. But I mean, I knew, we knew a couple of hymns that he would like and whatnot. But other families, sometimes it's so rigid what the person wants that there's no place for the family, well, no, that's what my loved one wanted, and we must do that. And no room for negotiation, no room to do it in any other way. So, but these kinds of conversations, I think we're going to have more and more. I think there's going to be more of this kind of work that I do about having end of life discussions as families, just like families want to have more discussions about their illness, how they're managing an illness, a serious illness or a loss or a disability. They also want more opportunity to talk about end of life. And we certainly are getting better, in some, certainly within hospices or palliative care units within hospitals. They have more professionals now offering these kinds of conversations to families. But it's still primitive, I think. We still are not there of really being comfortable talking about these things with each other. And sometimes if a family, if someone like me can facilitate that kind of conversation, help the family to come to some, especially to soften the suffering. That's the main thing, to soften the suffering and to dissolve any conflict.
I think one of the
So
major problems in society is the avoidance. Like we got major
Yeah.
kickback from the menopause episode. We were just talking about this, how like, oh, we can't talk about this. And now there's this huge void of these 40 something year old women that
Yes.
don't have
Yeah.
this, they don't have the resources they need. And
Yeah.
now something like this, we have been trained to avoid talking about death. We've been trained to avoid talking about sickness or illnesses. Like I think we're in this avoidance culture. And
Well,
you know what? Our podcast is amazing because we are shining light on these things and educating. I'm
well,
sorry,
I
dear, I
think
cut
it's
you off.
wonderful that you are. And I mean, this is a whole, what I'm about to say is like a whole conversation for another time. But I really think what you're calling avoidance is, I really think where we're to blame is the happiness industry.
Mm,
And
yeah.
we live in a society that wants to be happy all the time. And
Hmm.
and I think that's a lot of the reason why we don't always offer conversations to families when there's a serious illness or when there's death, because we want what? Even us as health professionals want to cheer the person up. We want them to be happy. We even want people, that are seriously ill. We want them to, be upbeat and not complain. You must never complain. And to me, not complaining, some families, some people with health problems don't complain because they feel like that's going to disappoint family members. And yet, so often it's not about complaining, it's about acknowledging their suffering. And the more that we can acknowledge people's suffering, then they can find peace around their illness. So the happiness industry, I mean, just Google happiness, gazillions of books, workshops about how to be happy. And even in healthcare, we've fallen into the same trap because we like to use the language more now of how are you coping with your illness? How are you managing your illness? Not to talk about suffering. And in nursing, as a young nursing student, I used to talk about suffering, and then we moved away from it. And you didn't hear the word suffering. And yet I picked it up again a few years ago. Why? Because that's how families talk to me. We're really suffering around this, or I don't want to see my loved ones suffering. They were using the word that I had to then, readopt into my professional practice and use that word. And now I ask families all the time, who in the family is suffering the most, because that's the person you want to attend to.
Yeah, there is really no avoiding suffering. That's part of the human experience. We left Eden, we left heaven, wherever we left it, so that we could have this human experience that has this side effect of suffering. But there are gifts within suffering. There is growth opportunities in suffering. There is just so much abundance there that if you can soften the way you come in and out of it, it's the transition moments that just need to be softened a little bit. So I just have one final question about the maid, and then I'm going to ask you the last question. So, in terms of when you're talking to people about maid, and I don't know why this kind of came in, because I think if it were me, this is what I would need: a maid meditation, an end of life meditation where you actually, because you say to the person, have you really given this a lot of thought? Now, okay, so the thought process here, but have you dropped in? Have you done the imaginative work of what that is going to be for you, what it's going to be for your loved ones? Let's have this meditation where we go through it from start to finish, not just the medical administrating stuff. And no, let's talk about what does your body feel and go through. And I feel like the more we get the person to connect, they make a better choice. Because if you can hear from your higher self, if you can connect to God or whatever you're calling it, what does it feel like in your body? Your body will tell you. Your body is a sounding board, it's a vibrational tool to tell you and to guide you. So, does meditation play any role in your end of life?
Not in my, it doesn't in my particular counseling. I mean, like I said, families are usually coming to me because there's conflict about it. Not, if they want to discuss the option of MAID, they usually are doing that already with their physician or a nurse practitioner or the palliative care nurse or someone else. Do you know what I'm saying? So that might, this whole process and your lovely idea of meditation might come into them, but I'm usually meeting families who have given it a lot of serious thought, and either their family member, and usually it's the family member would like to have MAID or is thinking about having MAID, maybe don't like it, but is moving in that direction, but there's other family members that are upset by it or don't want it. But I think your idea about meditation, yes, I mean, there's families, it's a huge decision. And the more thought, whatever ways they can come in touch with that and what that would look like for their family, the more information they have about it, the better, absolutely. And the more experiences they can have about how that might look. And that's what families want to know. They want to know, what is the process of dying? How would that look? And all of these kinds of things. Now, some families that I've met, they haven't yet put in a request for MAID, and yet some families that I meet have put in a request and have been approved, but now the family is reacting to that. Other families are just, in the exploratory phase of wanting to think about that possible option for them if it would become intolerable. Yeah. And some families that I meet, the pain has become intolerable. Yes. So all about suffering, yes.
Well, it's time for the last question then.
I could talk about this all day long. I love it.
The world, though, needs more of this, Lorraine. Like you said, everyone's addicted to synthetic happiness.
Yes.
And I think it's Brave New World. Everybody should read that book, Brave New World, where basically the masses just are addicted to happiness.
Okay, well, the question that was left for you by the last guest is, if there's a moment in your childhood that you could reparent, what moment would it be and what would you say to yourself?
That I could reparent. I'm not sure what that means.
In your childhood, if you had a traumatic experience or your parents weren't there for you in a way that you needed them in a particular moment, now you can go back and reparent your younger, knowing everything you know now. Where were you suffering in your childhood that you could soften?
Well, it's really interesting what popped into my mind in terms of what we've been talking about is about someone dying in our home. So when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, there was an elderly woman who was sitting in our living room who just suddenly passed away from, she was a friend of my grandmother, and I grew up in a 3-generational home. My grandmother lived with us,
Oh,
and it was
wow.
her friends who died sitting in the chair. And I never had that really explained to me. I just knew that she had died, but it was never something that we talked about, or I can like barely remember what my parents even said to me about it, but I remember being in the room and looking at her, and I obviously knew that she had died. Like I would want to have that explained to me and talked about. And, I mean, I've been present at the death of family members, that it's not like I want to be present, and I have been present at family members' deaths and friends, but that was my first experience with death,
Mm.
other than our dog George. And I remember
That's even
that
sadder.
that was a sad one too, when George died. But it's really interesting. I would like to have been explained or comforted or
Yeah.
something about that death.
For
Yes.
them to for them
Five
to take
years
a
is young.
yeah, for them to take a
5 or
moment
6 years old, and
and
I
talk to
don't,
you.
but whenever I think about I used to say, oh, the first death I ever experienced was 18 years old as a nursing student on Christmas Eve. But then I thought, no, that wasn't my first death.
Mm.
My first death was at 5 or 6 years old, with a woman, an elderly woman, dying in our living room. And I don't remember anybody ever talking about it or explaining it or ever mentioning it again. So yes, I would like to, that would be a good one. And I think all children need to, not to be afraid of saying what happened and what does this mean, and
Yeah.
not just about the dog George.
I like that answer.
Poor George.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Lorraine.
So what would your question be for the next person?
Well, based on what we've been talking about today, I think my question would be, what do you do to manage suffering in your life when it comes? The beautiful thing is we do get holidays for suffering. At least I do. I don't know, some people may live up, but I do get holidays. It comes and goes at different times in my life. But I'm always curious, what do people do to manage suffering in their lives?
I make inappropriate jokes.
Yes, well, I do too sometimes.
I am a deflector. I am a deflector of even my own emotions. I'm terrified of them, but I'm getting better. I'm getting better thanks to the podcast
Good.
and these kinds of discussions, which are extremely
Well,
important. So
it's a lifelong journey, isn't it? Dealing with life, dealing with emotions, dealing with these challenges, and they're different at different times of our lives. And yeah,
yeah, well, I just wanted to thank you again, author, speaker, professor, Dr. Lorraine Wright from lorrainewright.com. Amazing website, amazing human that everybody needs to know. And I was just very grateful for the time that we've had with you, Lorraine, and I just can't say thank you enough. And I look forward to the next conversation already.
okay. Well, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to, you know, elaborate on some of these thoughts and ideas that have been, my life's work. I really
Mhm.
appreciate the opportunity, and I loved you excellent questions and excellent reflections about what we've talked about. So thank you so much. It's been a lovely experience.
Thank you. So I just hope everybody at home listening in enjoyed the conversation that we had today and that maybe we brought you a little bit closer to, dealing with some of the uncomfortable things that you might have to talk about with your parents or with your grandparents or anybody in your family. I think this is something worth discussing because it's much better to go in with a plan and knowing than having that placed upon you in a moment and you don't know if you're making the right decision or not. So I really appreciate what you've brought to the table, Lorraine, because I don't think any of us really had in our families, both of our families have had those conversations yet. So we were going to have to practice bringing this up ourselves, right, Kati?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Can't wait. But no,
Pillow
it's
talk.
yeah, no, it's important. You know, our parents are getting older, and
Yes,
we've already, and my mom didn't even have a funeral. So when my dad dies, we're having a two for one, whether he likes it or not. It's for me. So
that's good.
we'll be doing that. So
Good.
yeah, I just want to remind everybody to like, subscribe, and share with everybody you know, and we'll see you on the next episode.